From one of Australia's former leading homicide detectives, this is I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin.
I had an interesting experience, and I'm not a particular lover of firearms. I got called on to go down to Westpac and go to the vault and pick up what turned out to be an old red Qantas bag with the white flying kangaroo on. Anyone who ever travelled in the 60s or 70s in Qantas would have got one of these carry-on bags, little sports bag. It was full to the brim. It was absolutely chocker with ammunition and pistols. I was glad I was doing a bit of exercise at the time, because I had to walk it from Martin Place up to the police centre.
Oh, right.
And hand it in, and the sergeant looked at me when I handed it in, and he said, asked me was I serious handing this in, and I said, well, absolutely, it's an amnesty. He said, well, are you going to tell me anything about it, Mr. Gould? And I said, no names, no pactorial, Sarge. It's yours.
I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin.
Today, I had a conversation with Greg Goold, who is a highly respected defence solicitor. They're the natural enemies of detectives, so sitting down having a conversation with one was always going to be a bit awkward. We learnt from today's conversation what drove our guest to defend accused persons, and some of his high-profile and interesting cases. Okay, Greg, well, I know that you defend your clients with the same passion that I used to pursue the suspects. As a defence solicitor, where did that passion come from?
Well, it just sort of developed, I would think, Gary. My dad told me that my grandmother had some interest in law or legal studies in South Australia, where she came from originally, and I sort of drifted through high school and scored a Commonwealth scholarship, which allowed me to do arts law at Sydney University, and I wasn't much good at science, so that was all that was left. And I ended up in law and drifted into criminal law. And I guess coming from a working class background and coming from a time when respect for each other was pretty important, it was drilled into you at school and at home, you get a feel for wanting to help people.
Okay, and that's I speak to the defence solicitors that I do speak to, that quite often they say about that everyone's entitled to a defence, which we fully understand, but there does seem to be a passion, and to do it as long as you do. I think you're in your fifth decade now.
I am, yeah.
That's a lot. You would have seen some changes in that time.
I certainly have, and some for the better.
So, when you're representing someone and you're playing at high stakes, and when on the major cases, like depending on how you do your job, potentially could dictate whether someone spends a large portion of their life behind bars. Do you feel that sense of responsibility when you take on a case? Oh,
absolutely, and more so since the standard non-parole periods, which applied to serious criminal activity, were introduced. That puts an extremely high or large burden on criminal law practitioners to make sure that their clients understand that if they go to trial and lose, the penalty that they're going to face is going to be substantially more than if they decide to plead guilty.
I'm going to ask you this, because I've spent my career in the witness box under cross-examination, sitting there and getting carved up sometimes, getting victories other times. And the most recent times I've been sitting in there as the accused, which is even worse than sitting in there as the informant. Have you ever been in the witness box?
I spent 3 days in the witness box at the Police Royal Commission, being cross-examined about aspects of the what you might call the King's Cross underbelly saga. Yeah. Because I acted for quite a few of the participants in the underbelly from the top.
Colourful identities.
The colourful Sydney identities. Yeah. And I was being asked about things that, as the responsible partner for the legal facilities that we provided. Yeah. I wasn't actually the solicitor on the ground doing a lot of the work. It was a couple of my employees. But I had to carry the can to the Crime Commission, and it was. I found it nerve-wracking. I was angered by it. Yeah. And some of the inferences that were being drawn. I've always tried to be above board with the way I carry out my practice, and I was a bit disappointed. in some respects.
And in the witness box, in that environment, in the Royal Commission, that's increasing the pressure. There's a lot more pressure than what I was talking about in the witness box of the criminal trial. Moving on past the traumas that I suffered in the witness box by people from your profession. And might I say, and I'd give this advice to young detectives, and I'd see some police come out of the witness box absolutely shocked that they've been criticised because they haven't done anything wrong. And I was at pains to explain, it doesn't matter if you've done everything right. There's still going to be criticism. This is a way of an adversarial system. They're going to try to pull apart what you've done and the decisions you've made and the things that you've seen and said.
That's true, Gary, but it's less so now. As I was saying earlier about the advances in forensic technology, the need for police officers to get into the witness box has become less than it was in the past. Police officers tend to gather evidence more than be involved in the case. They go out as investigators, they get the evidence, or they've already got the evidence because it's transcriptions of recordings, or they are recordings. They've got photographic evidence, which tends to make the job easier for the prosecution in terms of its presentation and coming to the defence lawyers and saying, well, try and get over this.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and that probably answers why the police don't have that experience, because I remember my early days in plain clothes. I was in the witness box virtually every week. There'd be some matter that you're called to give evidence on. And of course, and this is going way back, but when ERIS came in, the electronic recording of interviews, that took a lot of pressure out of, instead of the typewritten Q&As.
Well, I was around when there were the verbals, the police verbals as they were called, ERISPs are advantageous and can be to both sides if they're used properly. But normally, I would tell my clients never participate in an ERISP. Yeah, because my advice to them is, you're normally in a police station, so it's in their house. They're asking the questions, and you've been plucked and are in a state of shock. So the worst time to try and gather your thoughts and answer questions.
Well, that comes as a surprise. I've never heard a defence solicitor say, no, don't participate in an interview. I'm being a bit cynical there. Tell me about, from your point of view, if someone comes to you, someone gets themselves into trouble, or someone's been charged with by police, what's the process? They get in contact with you and say, hey, Greg, I want you to represent me. I've been charged with this offence. Where do you start from there? Talk us through the process.
I start off straight away by looking at what the charges are, and then going what is set out in the fact sheet. The fact sheet is a version of events that the officer in charge has formulated based on the evidence they've got at that particular time. Now, that's going to tell me, in a reasonably accurate way, the strength of the case and whether there's any holes in it that are going to assist in me stopping the police from eventually proving their case beyond reasonable doubt.
Okay, you've got the brief of evidence. You have a conference with the client, I would imagine.
Yep. And
what sort of advice, or without giving a specific example, what sort of advice, general advice, are you providing to the client?
Well, I'm telling the client, on the basis of what I'm reading now, what your prospects are likely to be, and unless you can explain what is said about your behaviour, which is criminal, that's going to change my mind or provide us with a defence, then I'm going to be saying, well, you're going to have to consider your position, and these are your options. You can plead guilty and get a lighter sentence. We can ask for particulars. We can take make various applications in the court to get more information. But generally, as an experienced criminal lawyer, you read the facts, you've got a pretty good idea of which way you're heading.
Yeah. Okay, you've got a brief. Let's use an example. I've charged someone with murder. It's a brief. I consider it a strong brief. Murder, we're likely to be going through the trial. without giving away your trade secrets, what do you go through looking at the brief? Do you look at failings in that with legislation that we've breached something, or there's a hole in this particular proof of the offence? What type of things are you looking for when you're dissecting a brief of evidence?
Well, first of all, you'll look at what the factual circumstances are,
Yep.
and whether the facts are based upon inferences, that's connecting the dots on the basis of what you expected to have happened, or what the police know happened. Now, that's firstly the thing you look at. What's the factual scenario here, and can that be established without speculation?
Right.
The second thing is you then go to the technical aspects of the case in terms of what then can be proved in a court of law, because what's put in a fact sheet or in a statement is not necessarily compliant with the rules of evidence. So that's...
Okay. And then you've got the brief, you go into court. Do you get access to witnesses, or you speak to your client and make a decision whether they're going to get in the witness box or not? How do you approach a strategy for prepping for a trial? Now, I'm talking in a general sense here, so it's each trial I would imagine that have its own issues. How do you prepare for a trial?
Well, unlike other states in Australia who still have local court proceedings where you can examine witnesses, New South Wales is to a large extent done away with that system, the committal system. It was as a result of a legend case called the Greek Conspiracy, which went for months and months and months as a committal proceeding down at Central Local Court and clogged up the whole local court system for a long time, or the Court of Petty Sessions as it was then called. But ultimately, there are ways of asking for further material, asking for particulars. There's a procedure called Section 82 of the Criminal Procedure Act, which allows us to ask for witnesses, but you're not going to get a witness or a victim in a sexual assault case because it's too traumatic. You're not going to get a victim of a serious violent offence. So you're really, really left with looking at what's available through the evidence, calculating what, as I was saying before, what is based upon inference or speculation, and what can be actually proved. You then have to think about what your client's going to say, and you have to make an assessment of their ability to withstand the rigours of the witness box.
Yeah.
Now, you've already spoken, Gary, about how tough it is, and I know from personal experience it can be tough. And the average person is simply not equipped, generally, to handle that type of pressure.
Yeah.
And so it's very rarely that you'd call your client in a trial.
Yeah.
In fact, there's an old saying amongst criminal lawyers that the best your case will ever be is at the end of the Crown case.
Okay.
It's all downhill from there.
And explaining that, and I think people have a sense of it, that the Crown case, that's the prosecution present their case, and then they rest their case. They've established, if they reach that benchmark and have established the prima facie, then it's a matter of the defence come in.
Yes, and to understand why you wouldn't call your client is because there are two levels of proof in a criminal trial, and that is the evidence being accepted by the judge, not the jury at that stage, but by the judge to what we call a prima facie level or a first level, which requires there to be evidence of the commission of the crime, but not necessarily proof beyond reasonable doubt of the crime. And that step from knowing that someone may have committed the crime and then elevating that to proof beyond reasonable doubt, and that means that there's no other explanation that's really consistent with innocence that would explain that conduct being available. Now, at the end of the Crown case, you might be saying, well, I've punched enough holes in this case for the jury to have some doubts. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. No, I've seen it happen. Before we talk about some of your high-profile cases and some of the characters you've met and the extraordinary world that you've seen in over 40 years practicing criminal law in Sydney, the lovely clean streets of Sydney, why did you get into law? First of all, your background. Where'd you grow up, and what inspired you to become a lawyer?
Born in Coogee by the second son of two avid Rabbitohs supporters. They bled red and green, mum and dad. I ended up a Rooster supporter somehow, much to their chagrin.
They would have been ashamed of you.
And so we grew up in the Sutherland Shire. Idyllic place for me to grow up. Water around on three sides, and went to a local Christian Brothers school. Did well at school. Surprised even myself in that regard. And ended up at Sydney University doing arts law. Majored in politics. Realised that's the last place I'd ever want to be. And then drifted into law. Got myself a job with a commercial firm as one of the last article clerks, and within 2 years I was out. I'd hung up my own shingle, and just for reasons that were driven by where could I get work, ended up in criminal law.
Okay, so it wasn't a driving passion from the day you went to kindergarten and you were accused of something and you were going to defend people for the rest of your life. It was just something that you fell into?
Yeah, just something that I fell into.
But your reputation is that you're passionate in the way that you go about your work, and you have a good reputation. I say that not begrudgingly. It's I think from a detective's point of view, when I came up against a good defence team, it would make me raise my standards. So it's sort of it helps in the way that you present your case. But what was it about going into criminal law on the defence side? Because there are other options. You could have gone in as a prosecutor. What made you follow the path of a defence lawyer?
Well, I've never prosecuted anyone. I can say that.
Oh, you should try it. It's great.
But I don't know. I think it was just. I'm a bit of a people person. I like to help people. I like to see people who are entitled to representation get a job done properly for them. And some people would say, "Oh, I wasn't happy with your work," and a lot of others would say, "I did a good job," and that really pleases me. And it upsets me that someone mightn't have thought they got the best job done for them, because as a lawyer, as a criminal lawyer, as a professional, that's what I strive to do, and make a difference in a person's life.
Yeah. Is there a point in your career when you started out that you got someone off a serious crime or off a crime that you believed that they're innocent, you got them off and you went home that night, or you felt, okay, I'm achieving some good?
I couldn't name the cases, Gary, but there have been cases where that's been the case. And I've felt really, really pleased that the system worked for that person. Yeah. And I've looked at systems in other parts of the world. I haven't appeared in courts elsewhere, only in Australia. And I think we're reasonably lucky that in terms of the ability of a system to provide fairness, this one does its best. Okay, so that's interesting, because I don't think it's infallible, the system. I think there's always room for improvement. I'd like to talk to you about that later on. But I got a sense, and going through a police career where I was prosecuting people for a long time, and then being on the other side of the prosecution as the accused, it's quite confronting. And I always had an understanding that you had to balance. It couldn't be favoured all for the defence or all for the prosecution. But seeing it from having the full resources of the state coming after you, and I was probably best set up as anyone could be to defend myself, in that I understood the system and had the experience. But it was intimidating. Well, that's because it's an adversarial system.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I regard going into a courtroom like going onto a sporting pitch. It's no holes barred within the rules of the game once you're in the courtroom, and you've got to play according to the rules. But having done that, you walk outside and you leave it there. Yeah. But it's not for the faint-hearted, and you've got to expect that you're not going to win every game.
Yeah. It is. It's, and I think people need to understand that. And I don't know of anyone that's been exposed to court, whether as a victim of crime or someone that's been convicted of a crime, that hasn't. It has an impact on you.
I enjoy it. So it's my daily bread, so I enjoy it.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy it because you've been doing it for a very long time. I don't know if you're considering changing careers. Oh, this was the wrong career.
Well, I don't think I'm going to be swapping places, Gary.
Well, don't get cocky. I thought I was going to be a cop until the day I died, but and look at me now. You've met some interesting characters and had some high-profile cases, and I'll just rattle off a few. And if there's cases that you're not comfortable talking about, please tell me. If not, let me know. One of the people that you defended, Alan Meridian. He was murdered in 2023, I believe.
He was.
Yeah. And there was a lead up to the murder. Do you want to just describe Alan and how you got to represent him in your dealings with him, what you thought of him, and the circumstances leading up to his murder?
I'd been involved with Alan going back to a case that he was involved in, which caused him to serve a considerable amount of time in prison. I ran into him afterwards, and he asked me would he or could he use my services if that was needed.
Yep.
And whilst he wasn't in any further trouble. He was, so far as charges were concerned, I'm not talking about what he may have been doing otherwise. But he came to see me, and he also got some advice from another lawyer who had actually worked for me in relation to trying to get out of the country because of fear of being assassinated.
And to put it in context, he was a high-ranking member of the Comancheros?
He wasn't a particularly high-ranking member. But because of allegations about his involvement in other criminal activity, he had a profile within that group.
Okay, well established.
Yes.
in that world. Okay, so there was fears that he was going to be killed, and I want to get your thoughts on some of the things with the. We call it the gang wars. I'm not sure if that's a media sort of beat up, but there's been a lot of public shootings and different things going on. So. At that particular point in time, there was legitimate threats for his well-being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he was aware of that, and he spoke to me about that, and it was a burden on him. It was a burden on his family, and it was something that I think, from what we know now, could have or may have been avoided.
And how with the benefit of hindsight, but how it could have been avoided?
Well, perhaps the police could have stepped in earlier.
Yeah.
My history of and experience of police officers, particularly in relation to listening device availability and monitoring devices, when they hear guns are involved, they jump in. If a shipment of drugs is coming in, they'll watch it. But if someone pulls out a gun, they're straight there.
Yeah,
it didn't happen with Alan, and that's a real disappointment that I feel in relation to the way the police acted. Now, I may be off beam, but as I understand it, they watched these people plan an assassination for a considerable period of time, and maybe they could have done something better.
We see these people played out in the media, and the media love the picture of the gangster on the front page of the paper or the lead story in the news. What was this particular person? What was he like?
So with me, he was a very, very intense type of person. On the one hand, he could be like your next door neighbour, nice bloke. On the other, but Alan was certainly not someone to be messed with. But in my dealings with him, I always found him to be straight up, honest, and reliable in what he said and what he would do.
Okay. You had, in dealings with him, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I've got the information wrong, but handing in a lot of firearms too.
I did. I've been asked sort of not to talk about that back in the day, but that was... That assisted him in his case, and it's on public record that it did assist him.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take it away from Alan, but you've had clients that have, to show that okay, I'm changing my ways of handed in firearms, and police are always keen to get firearms off the street. Have you the gun buyback scheme run by Greg Goold?
I had an interesting experience, and I'm not a particular lover of firearms. My dad had a 22 back in the day when everyone had a 22.
Yeah.
And you'd unfortunately shoot bandicoots in the backyard.
Yeah.
But I got called on to go down to Westpac Bank in Martin Place and go to the vault and pick up what turned out to be an old red Qantas bag with the white flying kangaroo on. Anyone who ever travelled in the 60s or 70s in Qantas would have got one of these carry-on bags, little sports bag. It was full to the brim. It was absolutely chocker with ammunition and pistols. And I won't name the name of the person who gave it to me, but I was glad I was doing a bit of exercise at the time, because I had to walk it from Martin Place up to the police centre.
Oh, right.
And handed in, and the sergeant looked at me when I handed in, and he said, asked me, was I serious handing this in? And I said, well, absolutely, it's an amnesty. He said, well, are you going to tell me anything about it, Mr. Gould? And I said, no names, no pactoral, Sarge. It's yours.
I remember when the gun amnesty was in, and people would walk into the police station and hand weapons in just over the counter. You'd be there, and they'd walk in with all sorts of rifles and different things. One of the things that was handed into you, it resulted in the army being notified and called out, I believe.
I got an AR-15,
yeah,
semi-automatic army. Well, I think they're automatic weapons.
Yeah.
But it had the grenade launcher attached to it, and I also got a grenade with it.
Okay, they're always good to.
And it was this. It was about. I won't talk. It was about 5 or 6 inches long.
Yeah.
Round with a sort of a sort of round knob on the end of it, and so I put it in the boot of my car, and drove up to. Well, first of all, I rang the particular inspector who I was dealing with. I think it might have been Arthur Katsajanis, yeah. And Arthur had put a sergeant in touch with me to deal with these sorts of things. And when I told them I was bringing in the grenade launcher and the grenade, it was all sorts. Also, we can't touch that. We've got to get the army involved. And they ended up having a major from Ordnance come down and take control, and I had the bloody thing bumping around in the boot of the car.
Yeah, well, we'll send you to a lecture about firearm safety later. But it's amazing the type of things that you get caught up in as doing the work that you're doing, and the type of characters that you meet. And there is, there's a fascination with true crime. And I think people are particularly interested in the gangster types, and we see these public shootings, and you think, how does this happen? You've had dealings with other clients. Wally Ahmed also ended up on the wrong end of a gun too. Yeah, well,
I acted for Wally, and when he was involved in a shooting at Condell Park of long-haired Danny, was involved in that. That was an interesting one. So I'd sort of acted for both sides, and I don't take sides. When a client comes in to me, provided there's no immediate conflict.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I've heard that because I worked gang squad for a while, and I heard some solicitors are associated with this gang, because if there's a crossover, there can be a conflict of interest. That.
I've been warned off cases only once or twice.
Yeah.
And I won't go into who it was and who it wasn't, but I was contacted and said it's not politically correct for you to be acting on this case. There's a lot of people who are upset about what happened.
Okay, all right. There's a lot of threat and menace in a comment like that if it's from a particular person. Have you ever felt in concern for your welfare or compromise with the type of people that you're dealing with? Like I would imagine, and I know the characters, and we don't have to name particular ones, but someone would come in and go, Greg, I want you get me off. You get me off this. I don't care what it costs, what you've got to do, get me off. And they would really be going at you that way.
I haven't really had that sort of intensity, Gary. Yeah. People come in and they say, can't you do better than that? I say, look, on what I've got before me, on the case that the prosecution have assembled against you, your chances of winning this case are minimal.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to waste your money and put yourself up for a much higher sentence, then I suggest that you reconsider. But if you want to get better news from some other lawyer who's prepared to tell you that, then off you go.
I think that probably safeguarded you because my dealings with people like that, if you're up front and they know where you stand, where they stand, you're probably better off than making a false promise. Yeah, I'll get you off, and then then you'll be living in fear for the rest of your life.
Well, I don't have any. I don't have any sleepless nights because of that.
Yeah.
The only time I was ever concerned was when two senior detectives came to see me back at a time when heroin was the drug of choice.
Yeah.
And might have been the late 90s or something. And a senior sergeant from the drug task force came to see me and told me that there was a contract on me. I was a bit disappointed to know that it's not as much as you get paid these days.
Yeah.
And it turned out that a rather roguish Chinese client of mine had asked me to send money overseas back in the day when you could.
Yeah.
And what he told me it was going for was totally different to what the reason it was going for.
Yeah.
And that he'd pocketed it when it got to Hong Kong.
Okay. So
I got the blame.
You got caught up in that. Well, there is potential to get caught up in that as innocent agent doing your job. Were you involved in the airport brawl? The flow-on effect from the airport brawl. I think 2009, Comancheros and Hells Angels came to blows at Sydney Airport.
I was acting for one of the Comancheros and got to know quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And was always of the opinion that my particular client was innocent because he had no real involvement in it. But because of the arduous nature of leaving a jail at 4:30 in the morning, travelling to the court, being kept in cells underground, never seeing the light of day, and getting back to the jail at 8 o'clock is first arduous and difficult for anyone when you're morbidly obese and your health is a real issue. My client didn't think he could take it and pleaded guilty to manslaughter.
Right.
Totally against my advice.
Okay, because there was 15. I remember I was on call in Gang Squad when it happened, and there was a lot of trouble brewing within the gangs at the time. I'd been out all night. There'd been 6 or 7 places shot up that night, and then I'm just driving home, and then the stuff that happened at the airport. I think there was. I was in Gang Squad at the time. I didn't work the case. I had some other cases. I think Steve French, the detective inspector, was the officer in charge. But 15 people were charged, all up with affray and different offences. Is that
and murder?
Yeah, and murder. Mick Howie, who again is another person that ended up at the wrong end of a gun.
Yeah, I think that's it seems to be that Sydney, particularly in the last 20 to 30 years, has changed in that respect.
Yeah.
I think for those who know what the Raptor Squad does and what they deal with mostly, I think there's been a distinct change in the way criminals conduct themselves in their dealings with each other. The ego seems to be so important. Greed seems to be paramount. And you would think when you hear the statistics of the amount of drugs that are brought into Australia and what comes in, that there's enough for everybody.
Yeah.
Not that that's right. Not that I'm saying that's right.
Yeah, no, I understand what
in
you're
the
saying.
context of how many millions do you want, and do you have to go and kill someone because they got more than you?
I'm watching it from the sidelines now, obviously, but in my early days in major crime, the shootings were quite often the person would disappear, put on a boat and taken out to sea and never seen again. Those were the type of murders that we're investigating. Now it almost seems like there's a statement being made that the amount of people that are shot coming out of the gym or whatever in public places and letting shots fire. I don't want to compromise you talking about specific cases, but do you see, because you've been involved in it and seen it, do you see that nature of the crime change?
Well, I do, and what I see, Gary, is that, and you'd recognise this, that 20 years ago, these guys who were prepared to do this sort of thing were doing drive-bys. Now they're prepared to stake out a location, watch the intended victim, and then get out of cars, walk up to the victim, and pump a magazine full of bullets to him from point-blank range.
Yeah, well, you're right on that, because the day or the night before the airport brawl, as I said, 7 houses have been shot up, and they were all drive-bys. They were the statements, but then it's escalated to the point, well, we're not going to do it just random drive-by. We're going to wait till the target comes out and blow them away.
Yeah.
It's it's a violent situation, an extreme situation. But you mentioned Raptor, and I talk about Raptor in that Raptor was formed on the back of what happened at the airport, because that was, up until that point in time, you had the Father's Day massacre with the bikies, where 6 or 7 people were killed way back in the 80s. But the violence wasn't public, and when that happened at the airport, you can't have Sydney Airport and someone caught up in a brawl and someone dying in a brawl like that. Then Raptor was formed, and it was really, the public had enough, the politicians had enough, and the police had to do something. Now, I know there's different views on Raptor, and I don't need you to comment, but I know the difference it made in that world at the time.
Well, it's when I look back on my career, what I've seen is that when I first started it, there was a lot of robberies, armed robberies. Drugs weren't as available, but with the Vietnam War particularly, and the influx of what used to be Buddha sticks, which was cannabis coming in, and heroin coming in. Cocaine had been around for years, but was sort of running under the radar, and having been criminalised back in the early part of last century. Meth was really just speed. It was a bikie drug, which was, we used to say, it's poor man's cocaine. And most crime was under the radar. But the last 25, 30 years have seen ego and I think sort of the look at me generation has influenced the way that crime has exploded. People want to be seen as criminals rather than criminals being under the radar, out of sight, making their money, punting most of it away at the races or the tab. But these days it's the look at me generation, and the influences, the criminal influences, want to be seen.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but it is almost generational, because I know, as you know, some of the good crooks getting round is they slip under the radar. They don't stick their head up, and you know they're doing major stuff, but they don't flaunt it. So it's interesting, but it's problematic, and it makes it police have got to respond. Like the underworld could operate, and I think the word the underworld operate under the cover, but when they commit crime so publicly, well, the public are not going to accept that, and the politicians and the police and everyone's got to act on it. Let's just change tact a little bit. We'll get more into your stories, because you got thousands of them. On different people that you've come across, but with guilty pleas, and we touched on it briefly about that. Have you, when you're representing a client, is there ones that, what happens if you've talked us through how you get the fact sheet, and you know what's you've looked at it, you've assessed it based on your experience and what weight. Have you ever had a client that you've just gone, I can't represent you? Has it ever got to that point?
I can't immediately think of anybody, but I've been lucky in that I haven't been, or my practice hasn't been one of those practices that does a lot of historical sex. I feel myself lucky in that respect, and not from my own personal experience, but from experience within my extended family. I've had experience that how sexual assaults, both in a family situation or an extended family situation, can have really lasting effects.
Yeah.
And I actually have a lot of respect for those practitioners who do that work, because not only the practitioners but the judges who are involved in it, it's a really difficult area of law, and I'm lucky enough not to have to deal with that. When you've got juveniles and young people involved who've been sexually abused, it's horrific stuff.
I've got a greater understanding, only the work that I've done also since I've been from the police, speaking to a lot of people who have been victims of childhood sexual assault. And even the time that I spent in prison doing the Breaking Badness podcast series, the amount of people in prison that were victims of child sexual abuse was quite frightening. And when you sat down and heard their stories, and we're always looking at ways of reducing crime. Society wants crime to be reduced. I think we've really got to look at the impact that child sexual abuse has, because people carry that with them. And you've talked, and I'm not saying any of the clients you've had or the people that we've mentioned here on the podcast, but quite often these big, tough, tattooed, covered bikies that, you don't mess with me, look about them. When you scratch the surface, go right back, it's because something that's happened in their childhood and they never want to be victims again.
Oh, well, we're all products of our upbringings,
Yeah.
and the influences that we've had in our lives, and hopefully for most of us they're all positive. But for those who haven't been that fortunate and haven't had the breaks with their parents, with their schooling, with the amount of money in the family, with food on the table, life could be pretty tough, and you make choices that you mightn't have otherwise made if you'd had the breaks that the bloke standing next to you had.
Yeah, I suppose you get to see that too. Like, you would get closer to the people who have been charged with criminal offences than I would from the police point of view. So you get to understand, you get to meet their family more, you would understand it, and that's your take on it. And you said before we sat down that you don't like to be judgmental on people unless you understand what path they've walked.
No, I that's been one of my sort of mantras that I go by. You can't walk in another man's shoes, and there but for the grace of God go I. And coming from a person who doesn't believe in God, but was schooled well in Catholicism, you've got to be very careful about how you judge a fellow man. And in relation to criminal practice, as I indicated to you earlier, Gary, I think sentencing, particularly for judges, is an extremely difficult area of law. I cringe from a police point of view where I hear mandatory sentencing, and I know that's a chest-beating comment that's made where crime appears to be out of control, and we're going to get tough and mandatory sentencing. What horrifies me about that is that each case should be judged on its own individual merits. You can't just, if you've committed that offence, there's not non-negotiable, you're going away for 10 years. It just doesn't sit with me well. What's your thoughts on? I agree with that, and there are very few crimes in our criminal calendar, in the Crimes Act, that carry a mandatory sentence. Interestingly enough, is assault occasioning death as an aggravated offence carries a mandatory sentence of 8 years.
Yeah.
So that's like the coward punch.
Yeah.
And the history of all that is unfortunate because of what happened with that poor young Kelly fellow.
Yeah. And
the reaction to that was quite remarkable, but all political, more than legal.
We had Kelly's parents on the podcast, and it's just such a sad situation, sad story. And I like the fact that they've changed the narrative and calling it a coward punch. I think that's good, changing that. But I'm also very much aware that people walking down the street, someone could lash out and a horrible situation happens, and they're mandatory 8 years in prison, or whatever. Did you say 8 years?
Yep.
Mandatory 8 years, and the nature of the offence mightn't warrant that, but the judge's hands are tied to send that person
That's
away.
true. That was all round. That was an absolutely disastrous piece of history that New South Wales has got to live with, because it wasn't just the Kelly family that was decimated, which was tragic. About 2,000 people lost their jobs in King's Cross, and these are people who've been working in that industry for a long time. And if anyone knows what it's like to go to work every day with the same people for years and years and years, then all of a sudden you haven't got a job.
The licensing law changes and all that impacted on it.
You're in no man's land. Your whole life goes down the drain. So it wasn't just that aspect of a person who deserved to be punished going to jail, and a poor family being totally decimated. Thousands of people were impacted by all that.
Well, if it was cleaning up the streets of King's Cross, I was living at Pyrmont at the time, and it all ended up down that end of town.
Well, the Star City got it all.
Yeah. Well,
absolutely.
I was living near there, and you go for a run in the morning, you're dodging things.
And the impact of that on Sydney as an after-dark city, we're still suffering from it. I think Chris Minns is trying to do an admirable job in bringing the life back to Sydney after dark.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we need to. We're a big world city. It needs to have that after hours. Sentencing for drug matters, and again, you learn a lot by putting foreign into a something a different environment, foreign environment that you're not used to. But the time spending in prison, speaking to the inmates and the amount of prisoners there that started using drugs, and then I'll buy a bigger bag and I'll give that to my mates, and then I'll buy a bigger, and end up in jail, and then doing very, very long sentences in jail. And I'm thinking, well, I've been charging people with murder that aren't getting this, and I know the damage that drugs can do, but I was shocked how many people are doing such lengthy sentences for drug dealing.
I'm pleased to say that in New South Wales, our sentencing in relation to drugs is generally pretty humane.
Yep.
Don't go to Western Australia. They whack you out of the park over there.
Yeah.
Unnecessarily, I think. I think it's inhumane, the sentences they give over there. But there's a lot of people doing long sentences. And it's strange that because of the fact that you've got a demand which is informed by people wanting to enjoy themselves or think they're going to enjoy themselves, but being totally ignorant of how that drug got to them. Yeah. The journey from South America or from some meth lab or from the Netherlands, if it's pills or so forth. But generally, it's quite difficult to understand the sentences that people do get when you're being asked to provide something to a group of people who want something. No one wants to be murdered. Yeah. No one wants to be sexually assaulted, and that's done by a person who deserves a greater deal of punishment. So it's a really difficult area of the law, but we're told in a society where I think there's got a lot to do with Queen Victoria and Catholics, who said if it makes you feel good, it must be bad, it must be a sin. I can't understand in a society in which we can do heart transplants, and we can save people's lives on an operating table, and we can have drugs for this and drugs for that. That they can't give drugs to people who want to use them that are safe and allow them to have a different experience. I just don't understand it, and all this. Industry that creates death and destruction could be avoided.
Yeah, well, you're thinking outside the square, and it wouldn't be without controversy. Taking what you're saying and putting it in practice. But
one proviso. Wait till I retire.
Yeah, there goes your business, Greg. Jeez, well done. But I've often looked at what we're doing, and you hear the war on drugs and all the commentary that comes with it, and it hasn't really worked. Drugs are still on the street, and maybe we've got to change our thinking.
Well, transportation, when the first fleet arrived, didn't work either, and we're still going through the same process. Yeah. What I'm really, really pleased about, though, Gary, is the way that jails are changing.
Yep.
And we're starting, the people who run the jails are starting to turn out human beings rather than criminals.
Yeah.
And that's something that we can be pleased with. I know a lot of people want revenge and they want to see people locked up forever because they've been individually affected by it. But we live in a state-run society where the state determines punishment, and we don't sort of live in a tribal society where you go and get an eye for an eye and so forth. And it's pleasing from certainly a criminal lawyer's point of view that the jails are starting to improve. And people might look at the new Hunter section of the Cessnock trial and say, oh, look what these criminals are getting. They haven't got their freedom.
Yeah. Well, Greg, you've got, I concur 100% with what you're talking about there, and Macquarie Correctional Centre, which is on the same vein as Hunter, and what they're doing there and the way that they're treating prisoners. That was the whole premise of going in. Corrective Services invited me into prison to have a look at it, and I can't champion it enough what is happening in there, because the high recidivism rate that we have, we've got to try and break that cycle. And someone that's known to you and someone that I've mentioned often here, who became a good friend before he passed away, Bernie Matthews.
Yep, I remember Bernie.
Who did a lot of time in prison, a lot of time in the hard prisons in Grafton and Katingle. He was the longest serving prisoner in Katingle, the first Supermax. And he said to me, you treat us like animals, we're going to come out like animals. And what I saw at Macquarie Correctional Centre, there was respect between the inmates and the corrective services staff, and it's not always perfect, but there was definitely a different vibe in that prison, and the people I was talking to seemed a lot more prepared to come out into society and integrate back into society than other prisons that I've been in, where you feel the tension. You walk in there, everyone's bridged up and everyone's ready to go. And some of the prisoners said to me when I was in there, you put us in a jail when you open the cell doors, and the moment we walk out, we're looking for where the next bit of danger's coming from, and it's about survival. And then you open the door and put us back in the streets, we've still got that attitude. Mm-hmm. So if someone insults me or someone does something that annoys me, my natural reaction is I'm going to react like I would in prison. And it makes sense when it's explained that way, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And that's built upon looking at people in terms of why they committed a crime. And then going back to that sentencing aspect that we were talking about before, and crafting a sentence that's going to punish them, because there are 7 different aspects to sentencing, which includes deterrence and acknowledgement and protection of the community and the punishment of the offender.
Can you break that down? Just explain that, because I don't think a lot of people, we all make comments, oh, that person didn't get enough, or that was a big sentence. What's the criteria when you're looking at sentencing?
There are 7 criteria. Don't ask me to name them all, but there's and they each have equal value. First of all, the person's got to be punished for what they've done. They've got to acknowledge what they've done. They've got to be put in a position where the community is safe. Other members of our society have got to be deterred from doing the same things by virtue of the punishment that particular criminal receives. And importantly too, that person's got to be rehabilitated. Yeah. In the children's court, rehabilitation takes the primary place because there's a view which is right that children have a chance of being saved. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen because a lot of the times they go into the very environments which cause them to commit crime in the first place. But sentencing has to look at all those aspects, and if you go into an environment where everything's taken away from you, including respect, then you're never going to have any respect. And ultimately, it saves the community money. People don't go back to jail.
Well, it saves money, and I spoke to someone about a family member, a victim of crime, about what they're doing in Macquarie and Hunter. And this person, and I've mentioned him before, I can mention him again, I know he's comfortable with me talking about it, Ken Marslew, whose son was murdered. And he set up Enough is Enough and was protesting and truth in sentencing and all sorts of things. Over the past 20 years, he's channeled his energy differently in that how can we prevent crime? And I asked Ken, because I get on this platform about what they're doing in prison, I think is better than the more traditional way prisons were done. But I wanted to feel comfortable that I'm not forgetting the victim's point of view on this. And Ken made the point that, it's not about getting tough on crime, it's getting smart on crime, and that if you reduce crime, you reduce victims. So it seems like a no-brainer. And if that's what that prison system that we've been talking about does, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
It does, and I think that you might remember the Anita Cobby matter.
Yep.
Her father had a very, very pragmatic view, very much like Ken's, and it was not, put aside his anger and his revenge and thought about how can we make the system better. And I think it's hard for victims or victims' families to come to that position, but it's a position, that is worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree. It's worthwhile, and utmost respect for them that they can do that. And Ken would say, and Gary Lynch, Anita Cobby's father, Ken would make the point that he's still got the anger. He will always have the anger, but he's not going to let it destroy him. He's going to channel it into something positive. And I find it quite inspirational on what Gary Lynch did as well. We might take a break now. When we get back, we're going to talk about more of your cases. I'm also going to ask you if you've ever fired a gun in a courthouse. Have a think about that. You can get some legal advice during the break if you need. And I'm going to give you another question on notice. Have you ever come across a good detective? Like 40 years, you must have had someone that you can say, think about it, and we'll come back in part 2 and talk about more about your fascinating career and your insights in the law and order.
Mm-hmm. I'll put my mind to it during the break, Gary. Thanks.
Okay.